Have you ever seen one of those old, stuffy portraits of a Victorian woman and just wondered? I mean, under all that silk and lace and those giant skirts, how on earth did they handle the most basic, everyday human needs? Well, it's this fascinating little mystery that opens up a whole hidden world of some serious ingenuity. Today, we're diving in and figuring out how they managed it all. Okay, just picture this for a second. You're wearing almost 20 pounds of steel and fabric. Your waist is squeezed into a corset, you're in a crowded room, and nature calls. What do? The answer, it turns out, is a story of incredible, and yeah, kind of shocking, cleverness. I love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. This was not some simple private moment. No way. It was a huge physical challenge. It required planning, patience, and a whole lot of precision just to avoid a complete social disaster. So, before we can even get to the solutions, we first have to build the problem. We need to understand the massive scale of this fashion fortress they were dealing with every single day. Getting dressed was a whole operation. First, you got a thin linen shift. That's the only thing actually touching your skin. Then, boom, the corset gets laced up, literally reshaping your body. On top of that, you're piling on maybe 6 or 7 petticoats to get that volume. And the grand finale was the crinoline, a literal cage of steel hoops that created that giant bell-shaped look. And think about what that means for just living. We are talking about skirts that could be 6 feet wide. Just walking through a doorway became a whole choreographed move. Sitting down was a project. Some houses even had special chairs built without arms, just so a woman in a crinoline could actually sit on them. It was a logistical nightmare. Okay, so we've established the problem. It's huge. Now, let's get to the solution. And part one of that solution is the unsung hero of the Victorian home, the chamber pot. But trust me, this was not just some crude bucket. Oh no, these things were engineered. They were often made in an oval shape, which made them way easier to slide under all those petticoats and inside the steel cage. The fancy ones had these really tight-fitting lids, not just for the smell, but it was also a quiet signal to the servants that it needed to be emptied. And they were hidden everywhere, inside beautiful chairs and cabinets. It was a whole system of silent, discreet service. The level of skill this required is just incredible. A woman couldn't just lift her skirts, it was impossible. So her maid would have to help position the pot perfectly underneath her, so the whole act could happen without anyone seeing a thing. At big parties and balls they had at retiring rooms, where maids basically acted like a Formula One pit crew, managing the giant skirts, getting everything done, and sending the lady back out to the party like nothing ever happened. All right, so the chamber pot system was pretty clever, right? But the next piece of this puzzle is, well, it's even more surprising. It's time to talk about what Victorian women were, or more accurately, what they weren't wearing. Yep, you heard me right. For a long, long time, they just didn't. The mountain of fabric was seen as modest enough. There was no bottom layer like we have today. And this fact right here is the absolute key to understanding how the whole chamber pot thing could even work without a woman having to get completely undressed. Eventually, though, things had to change. I mean, all it took was one strong gust of wind to cause a major public wardrobe malfunction. The solution? The invention of split-crotch drawers. Basically, they were an open-crotch undergarment. They gave you a little coverage but still let you use a chamber pot without taking a single thing off. So simple, so smart, and for them, it was totally revolutionary. And this kind of ingenuity, it really extended to all sorts of other daily challenges. Toilet paper wasn't a thing yet, so people used soft cloths, old newspaper, even moss. For menstruation, women had this whole system of homemade cloth pads that they held in place with something called a tea bandage. It was all very private and required constant, careful management. So let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about the personal solutions, but what about the bigger world of Victorian sanitation? Because what was happening outside the home was a whole different and much messier story. For most people, the bathroom was a pretty portable system. You had your chamber pots inside, and then you had to get rid of the waste. Some buildings had these things called guardrobes built into the walls, which were basically just chutes that dumped everything straight onto the street below. That famous cry, "guard alow," that means watch out for the water, was a very, very literal warning. But here's where it gets really wild. That waste wasn't always just waste. It's hard to believe, but the contents of a chamber pot could actually have a surprising second life in the military. Get this. The link between your bathroom habits and the battlefield was surprisingly direct. Urine is a great source of ammonia, and you need ammonia to make saltpeter, which is a key ingredient in gunpowder. So during a war, government agents would literally go around collecting urine so they could process it for the war effort. Incredible. This comparison really tells you everything about the Victorian idea of what clean meant. Those outer dresses, they were incredibly expensive and delicate, so they almost never got washed, maybe twice a year, if that. Mostly they were just aired out. The real workhorses were the undergarments, the shifts and drawers. Those got scrubbed weekly, and they were the only real washable barrier between a woman's skin and her fancy clothes. So despite all of this, Victorian women didn't just suffer through it, they adapted and they innovated. And this final part is all about that human element, the hidden network of knowledge and support that made this whole crazy system actually work with a sense of grace. See, this wasn't just about one person figuring it out. It was a team sport. Mothers taught their daughters the specific physical techniques needed. Maids were like silent engineers, managing all the logistics. Friends had their own coded language, discreetly saying they needed to retire for a moment. There was this whole hidden workforce of maids and laundresses whose job it was to make sure a lady's dignity and her expensive dress stayed perfectly intact. And here is one last fascinating little twist. Because these women were so physically restricted by their clothes, often confined to their homes, what did they do? They started reading more and writing more. They engaged their minds. In a very strange way, these fashion prisons actually helped spark a new kind of intellectual freedom. It's so easy for us to take our modern comforts for granted, right? A simple trip to the bathroom is, well, simple. But our reality today is built on top of all the solutions these women had to invent out of sheer, absolute necessity. So their struggles weren't just some weird, quirky thing that happened in the past. Their creative problem-solving actually helped push forward the ideas that led to modern sanitation, more practical clothing design, and eventually, the total liberation of women's fashion. They literally turned a logistical nightmare into an art form. And that is the wild, untold story of how elegance met necessity. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. From the pit crew maids to making gunpowder out of pea, which part of their daily life do you find the most mind-blowing?